Do you all know where the Ozarks are?
Woo! Sure.
Do you know what the Ozarks are? Millions of years ago, North America and South America collided, and the tension caused the earth to swell with the promise of a new terrain. And the water and the wind slowly carved that uplift into the most beautiful bluffs and ridges and hills. And the water, as it ran down the hills, formed great rivers. And those rivers were wild and unpredictable and sometimes cruel. In the 1930s, the Army Corps of Engineers built massive dams to tame those rivers. And the water backed up and it filled the valleys and it created these great, great lakes. And those lakes became the lifeblood and the economy and the religion of every Ozarker. I was 3 months old when my family threw me into the lake to see if I would float. I did. I was 3 years old when I won my first fishing tournament.
Wow.
And I was 4 years old the first time my father lit a cigarette lighter and pressed it to my skin to see how loud I would scream. And on that day, I decided that the water would forever be my only father. And every summer, I got to go visit that father. I spent every summer in and under the water, and I learned to speak the water's language. Did you know that water has a language? It's the language of movement. When you are under the water, every living creature moving through that water is sending ripples of energy through the water, and it moves through you. And if you slip underneath and you close your eyes and you just let the water speak, it tells you the most amazing stories. Now, one summer, we had a huge flood, as the Ozarks is wont to do. And I did this thing that I loved to do when it was flooding. I swam down to where a wooden fence had been completely submerged. And I pulled myself under and I pinned myself under it so that I could look up and I could watch the fish swimming by without worrying about trying to keep from floating up, right? And I was watching this one bluegill go up against a carp. They were just going back and forth, being fish, doing what fish do. And all of a sudden, it felt like an elephant had slammed into my chest. I did not know what was happening. I pushed myself off of the fence and floated to the surface, and I started crawling toward the bank. I was screaming for my mother, and she thought I was kidding at first because kids do that in the lake. But she looked at me and saw that my face had turned completely green. And she picked me up out of the water and she rushed me back to the camper. Now, my mother is a nurse. She had her equipment with her. She pressed a stethoscope to my chest and she timed my heart. My heartbeat was going 222 beats per minute. But when she pressed her thumb to my wrist to feel my pulse, she could only feel 85. That's not how the human body works. But we were 3 hours from the nearest hospital. So my family packed ice around me and we waited the 4 hours it took for my heart to calm down. And when we left, I waved goodbye to my father for a very long time. And that began the journey to find my way home. Now here's the thing about being a teenage heart patient. Your age walks into the room before you do. So doctor number 1, who I like to refer to as the quack, told me that I didn't really have heart problems. I just needed to go on the Atkins diet. Tried that for a year, decided cheesecake was more important. Doctor number 2, this was down at Arkansas Children's Hospital, because fun fact, in Arkansas, if you were under the age of 18, the only place you were allowed to receive cardiac care at the time was all the way in Little Rock, 4 hours from where I lived. He took one look at me and my age and decided to explain a heart valve to me as the flappy thingy, and told me that all of my problems would go away if I urinated more. That did not work either. Doctor number 3, Dr. Bogomilov, was treating me much like every other doctor. And I was in a consultation with him, and he was telling me over and over again that young people just have elevated heart rates sometimes, especially when they're active. And for the first time in my life, I came uncorked. And I looked him dead in the eyes, and I screamed, "Watching Gilmore Girls is not a workout!" And he finally listened to me. I'm kidding, no. He did, however, order what's called an EP study. Has anyone had one of those? Oh, they're so much fun. They put 6 incisions in your groin while you're fully awake. They send a bunch of diodes up into your heart. You're watching this on a monitor above your head. They pump you full of adrenaline until you're shaking, and then they electrocute you until they hopefully find the damaged nerves in your heart. But Dr. Bogomilov did not fully believe that I had damaged nerves in my heart. And he did not take it seriously, and the entire time I was under, he was dancing around the room, singing into his scalpel, Shania Twain's I Feel Like a Woman. It's a good selection. But after that, my diagnosis was proxy supraventricular tachycardia. Bunch of words meaning the electrical pulses going through your heart have a repeat signal, like in music, but that it was uncurable. And he sent me off to college with a bottle of beta blockers and said, good luck. Now, beta blockers can be a beautiful thing, especially if you have an elevated blood pressure. They can also be awful if you have a low blood pressure. I have chronic low blood pressure. And as time went on, I gained weight extremely rapidly, 30 pounds in about 2 months. I still have the stretch marks on my leg where my skin literally split open. And there came a point in my second semester of undergrad when I woke up and the entire dorm was shaking. Now, Arkansas has been dealing with a lot of fracking issues in the past couple decades, and we have been waiting for the day the New Madrid decides to wake back up and send the Mississippi River backwards again, and I was afraid that time had come, so I shot up out of bed and I grabbed my roommate and I woke her up and I started dragging her out the door, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "We gotta get out of here, there's an earthquake." She said, "No, there's not." And I realized that I was the only one shaking. You were not supposed to quit beta blockers cold turkey, but I flushed them down the toilet that night. And I decided to try and make it through college without any assistance. It was nice because I could eat grapefruit again. But slowly my health deteriorated further. I went in weekly to have my blood pressure measured by the university's nurse, and for about 2 years it sat at 60/40, which doctors tell me is the equivalent of a walking coma. The second semester of my senior year, before the whole victory lap, I started losing my hearing and my eyesight. And when you start to lose your hearing, you don't lose your hearing. Suddenly it gets elevated for a while. And actually the sound of a cell phone charger in a wall, that high-pitched sound that you can barely notice, was enough to make me cry. My grades tanked. I went from being an A student to a straight F student. And I went to university disability, and I just said, I don't know what help I need, but I know I need help. And because I was losing my hearing, they sent me to the audiology department. Luckily, my college had a great one. And the chair of audiology sat down with me, and we had a brainstorm session to figure out what was going on. And after we had talked for about 2 hours, I told him what my blood pressure had been, and he said, "Oh my God, you need help now. If your blood pressure is that low, there's no oxygen getting to your brain and your brain is dying." But he also said, "I know an electrophysiologist who specializes in young people. I can get you in next week." And that went forward. A few months later at St. Vincent's Hospital in Little Rock, I underwent another EP study, but this one with a successful quintuple ablation, which means they found 5 damaged nerves in my heart and electrocuted them until they died. It was an 8-hour procedure, but they let me pick my own music, and I picked 80s glam this time. at the end of that, there was a bit of a recovery period. After an EP study, after an ablation, you were not allowed to walk upstairs or lift anything heavy because if the incisions open, your major arteries will open and you will instantaneously bleed to death, which is a fun thing to learn. But there was also this immense relief. The moment I came out of surgery, and again, not sedated, so it's not like there was a waiting period. It felt like that elephant had stepped off my chest and like I was breathing for the first time. And it turns out if you haven't had oxygen for 7 years, it will get you high as a kite. And I thought squirrels were the most magnificent thing. They are so pretty, guys. But after I had fully healed, the producer I was working for at the time, working summer stock theater, he had a pool and he let me come over. And finally, I slipped into the water and I said hello to my father again. Thank you.